In 1252, Pope Innocent IV, his papal bull ad extirpanda, changed the course of European justice. He authorized the use of torture in ecclesiastical courts, declaring that heretics could be subjected to physical coercion without loss of life or limb. With precision, authorities transformed torture from rare exception into legal norm, creating an apparatus of suffering that endured for centuries. From chambers beneath palaces to crowded squares, Europe developed systematic methods for extracting confessions and instilling fear. As Dominican Inquisitor Bernard Gui observed in 1323, limbs crack and separate until prisoners confess to crimes they never committed. The roots of medieval torture lay in Roman law and Germanic customs. Roman law allowed torture mainly for slaves and foreigners, while citizens were protected. Germanic tribes relied on ordeal, compurgation, and blood money. After Rome his fall, these systems coexisted for centuries. The transformation began in the 11th century when rulers sought to consolidate power. The rediscovery of Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilis in Italian universities around 1070 provided legal scholars with Roman provisions for torture. This knowledge, combined with Crusader contact with Byzantine and Islamic systems, accelerated change. Military orders blended Roman law with ecclesiastical authority, shaping later courts. By 1200, torture was integrated into European law. In Italy, Frederick II, his Liber Augustilis of 1231, authorized torture for certain crimes, setting vague standards easily abused. The Church's acceptance through ad extirpanda represented the culmination. Issued against heretical movements like the Cathars, it allowed torture without loss of life or limb, though in practice this limit was meaningless. Secular officials performed the acts, keeping church hands symbolically clean. Crucially, confessions extracted under torture were deemed valid. By the late 13th century, torture chambers had spread across Europe. Cologne, his archbishop, maintained a facility by 1260 with instruments and trained staff. Similar centers appeared in Toulouse targeting Cathars. Techniques drew from Roman precedents but became more refined, creating devices that inflicted precise levels of pain while keeping victims conscious. The rack emerged as the most infamous instrument. Documented in the 13th century, it stretched victims until joints separated. Bernard Gui described its effectiveness in forcing confessions from suspected heretics. The rack inflicted suffering so severe that prisoners often confessed to crimes they never committed. Contemporary records describe its gradations of pain. In Carcassonne, 1329, Pierre Maury, accused of sympathizing with the Cathars, was first shown the instrument to break his resolve. When he refused, he was bound and stretched until his shoulders cracked. Witnesses recorded his cries echoing through the palace and his body appearing twice its natural size. The strappado offered another method. Victims were bound with hands behind their back and suspended by a rope from the wrists. Their own weight dislocated shoulders, producing agony while leaving few visible marks. French records describe refinements such as attaching weights to the feet. At Avignon in 1335, a suspected heretic endured 4 hours of strappado, raised and dropped repeatedly until his arms hung useless. Despite the ordeal, he refused to confess, frustrating torturers into harsher measures. Fire-based torture brought psychological terror. Victims' feet were slowly roasted over burning coals, filling chambers with the stench of charred flesh and screams that carried through nearby streets. In 1353 Toulouse, Bernard Gui, accused of heresy, was strapped into a chair and subjected to hours of burning. By midday, witnesses recorded flesh separating from bone and the odor forcing attendants to flee. Devices of crushing inflicted further horror. The thumbscrew, first used in German courts, slowly shattered fingers and thumbs. Larger versions targeted feet, hands, or even heads. Boot torture in Scotland encased legs in iron boots tightened with wedges. In 1397 Edinburgh, one victim's legs were so crushed that fragments fell out when the boots were removed. Water torture exploited the body limits. Victims were forced to consume massive quantities of water, distending their stomachs and producing sensations of drowning while conscious. Some records describe prisoners made to swallow up to 8 gallons. Torturers studied anatomy and psychology carefully, learning how to maximize suffering without killing, reviving fainted victims with cold water or salts to prolong agony. Beyond torture chambers, executions became public theater. Crowds of thousands gathered to witness carefully staged displays of state power. Condemned prisoners were paraded through streets on carts, pelted with refuse by some and pitted by others, before reaching the scaffold to play their final role in ritualized death. The scaffold became a stage where church, state, and executioner converged. Clergy preached sermons on divine justice, officials read formal charges, and the hooded executioner embodied the state authority to inflict death. Each role reinforced what historian Mitchell Murbach described as the theater of punishment. Methods of execution varied by status, crime, and region. Beheading, seen as honorable, was reserved for nobility. Anne Boleyn 1536 execution at the Tower of London exemplified this privilege, granted a swift death by sword from a French executioner. Hanging remained the most common fate for ordinary criminals. Unlike later drop methods, medieval gallows caused slow strangulation, sometimes lasting 20 minutes, with victims struggling visibly as crowds interpreted their final motions as signs of their soul condition. Burning alive, the most horrific punishment, was used for heretics and witches. Victims were chained to a stake in public squares as wood was lit beneath them. The 1416 burning of Jerome of Prague in Constance revealed the ritualistic nature of such deaths. Wearing a paper crown marked with devils, he was urged to recant but sang hymns until smoke silenced him, praying until flames consumed his face. Crowd reactions reflected complex dynamics. Executions reinforced authority but also created moments where sympathy or hostility shaped the atmosphere. At London Tyburn, permanent gallows known as the Tyburn Tree could hang multiple prisoners at once. Execution days drew carnival-like crowds with vendors selling food and drink. Condemned prisoners were expected to deliver final speeches acknowledging guilt and warning others. Those who complied often received sympathy, defiant ones faced harsher treatment. Bodies became props of power, left on gibbets for weeks as warnings or quartered and displayed across kingdoms. London Bridge displayed traitors' remains for thousands to witness daily. The Inquisition machinery pushed cruelty into systematic form. At Avignon, papal palace basements contained purpose-built torture chambers with drainage for blood, sound-dampening walls, and specialized devices. Staff were trained in both technique and legal procedure. Records from the Languedoc Inquisition show detailed registers documenting names, accusations, torture methods, confessions, and sentences between 1249 and 1350, illustrating the bureaucratic precision with which violence was applied. Inquisition records reveal chilling efficiency in processing suspected heretics. The case of Pierre Odier illustrates this methodical system. A former priest who converted to Catharism, he was arrested in Toulouse and interrogated. When he refused to confess, inquisitors ordered 6 hours of strappado over 3 sessions, with breaks designed to worsen pain as swelling increased. Between sessions, he was confined to a cramped 6 by 4 foot cell that deprived him of sleep and disoriented him with minimal light. Guards woke him regularly, compounding psychological torment. Interrogation extended beyond physical pain. Inquisitors used fabricated evidence of family confessions, false promises of leniency, and the torture of loved ones to break resistance. The case of Béatrice de Planissoles in 1320 demonstrates these tactics. Arrested for suspected Cathar sympathies, she was forced to hear her daughters screaming under torture in adjacent cells. Records show this psychological torment proved more effective than direct coercion. The Montaillou investigation between 1318 and 1325 exemplifies systematic repression. Inquisitor Jacques Fournier, later Pope Benedict XII, ordered the interrogation of nearly the entire village. Men, women, and children were tortured, with each confession implicating others in a widening cycle of accusations. Families betrayed one another, trust collapsed, and the community was left nearly destroyed, its survivors imprisoned, executed, or broken. As accusations shifted to witchcraft in the late medieval period, techniques evolved. The Malleus Maleficarum, published in 1487 by Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, detailed methods for torturing suspected witches. Prisoners were shaved to remove charms, interrogated about alleged supernatural crimes, and subjected to escalating torment if they resisted. The manual argued witches had unnatural resistance to pain, justifying unlimited brutality. Secular authorities soon adopted similar frameworks. By 1300, torture was common in royal courts across Europe. Kings used it to secure confessions, intimidate rebels, and display authority. Philip IV of France institutionalized torture during his conflict with Pope Boniface VIII. His officials arrested and tortured high-ranking clergy, establishing practices later embedded in French law. The case of Bishop Bernard Gui, arrested in 1301, shows how royal courts mirrored inquisitorial methods. At the Louvre Palace, he endured days of torture in purpose-built facilities, his interrogation meticulously recorded by scribes. England adopted torture slowly, limiting it to threats against royal security. The Plantagenet kings used it mainly on traitors, with Edward I torturing captured Scottish nobles. The Tower of London became the central site, equipped with imported and local devices. In Germany, Nuremberg opened a torture facility in 1320, while Charles IV Golden Bull of 1356 legalized torture for serious crimes, encouraging harsher practices. Italian states advanced methods further, Venice perfected water torture, and Florence under the Medici used it to suppress political rivals. Competition fueled innovation, with craftsmen refining devices like the wheel, which shattered bones in stages while victims remained conscious. By 1400, torture was institutionalized, with professional guilds and even law schools teaching its procedures. Humanist critiques in the late 15th century, legal reforms, and Protestant challenges eroded support. Württemberg abolished torture in 1567, proving justice could function without it. Merchants and bankers needed fair systems to resolve disputes, pushing Europe away from torture-based confessions. Expanding trade demanded legal standardization, while the 30 Years' War devastation created revulsion against institutional cruelty and spurred calls for stability. In France, Louis XIV restricted torture to serious crimes with the Ordonnance criminelle of 1670, while police forces and scholars advanced evidence-based investigations. The scientific revolution further shifted thinking. Francis Bacon emphasized empirical observation, steering courts toward objective proof. Religious movements like Jansenism and Pietism promoted dignity and mercy, while Catholic voices such as Saint Alphonsus Liguori condemned torture as unchristian. Enlightenment thinkers sealed the assault. Cesare Beccaria on crimes and punishments branded torture irrational and unjust, inspiring reforms across Europe. Prussia abolished torture in 1754, followed by Saxony, Austria, and France. By 1800, most states ended the practice, a humanitarian milestone that replaced cruelty with justice, reason, and human dignity.